How you doing, guys? It's Lee here, and today we are going to be going over the ARP-9 gearbox disassembly and maintenance, and following on with the AK as well, giving you a little bit of a more detailed look into the maintenance on that blaster also. Let's not waste any time, we'll get straight into it. Alright guys, this gearbox here out of the ARP-9, once you have basically removed the hand grip, removed the upper, you're left with the actual internals, the gearbox itself. First thing you're going to do before you actually try to break open the shell is remove the spring. So I'm just going to press this one in, turn it counterclockwise or clockwise, whichever way you can get the tags to line up with the two holes in the back of the gearbox. Remove that spring. Now always do this first up. Now when I was learning and you forget and you're holding the gearbox and you undo something and it shoots out over your shoulder or whatnot, that is something you don't want to happen. So remove your spring and your spring retainer first up. Alright, next up you're going to grab yourself a Phillips head screwdriver. I have removed a few screws already just to make this a little bit quicker, but we are just going to go through on the external, on the upper part of the shell. We're going to remove these two. Now we are also going to remove the lower portion screws. Now with these screws in the nylon shell, the shell is actually pretty tough, it's pretty resilient, but if you do go ahead and use your Gorilla mitts and over tighten it, you will strip the nylon. So just keep that in mind when you are putting all of your screws back into the shell and doing it up once you've completed your maintenance, that if you do go too tight, it will cause some damage. Alright, screws are removed. We are now basically going to lever the case up. Now you can use your screwdriver and just push through. You've got these bushes. The bushes in the center is going to be the post of your actual gears. So what I'm going to do is just levering the box up, pushing down on the center post of those gears is just going to try and keep all the gears where they are. So when you pull the shell open, they don't all stick to the upper half. I want them to stay in that lower half. Putting my thumb on my cylinder, holding the trigger, just going to lever on the rear part of the gearbox shell. So now I can see that all three gears have stayed in the lower portion of the shell. Pulling up on the rear there, I know that basically I can now pull with my front finger and just work that case loose. There we go. Alright, so what we have here, guys, is lower assembly with everything still in it. Upper assembly, this has got your mag prime button still attached to the wires on the back. Now as you can see here, guys, we do have the bushes, 3 bushes here. These 2 bushes are bare, where this bush here still has a shim stuck to it. Now that shim, if you cross-reference back to the lower part, this shim belongs on the top of that gear. It is very important to make sure you note where all your shims are. If you have a shim here, you take it out and then you put it back on this gear here, which is your sector gear. That's going to make that gear extremely tight, and it's actually going to cause a lot of damage. It's not going to cycle properly, it'll be really tight, it'll draw a whole lot of amps when you try to cycle the blaster, bringing on a lot of damage. So please ensure as soon as you flip the upper case off, look for where your shims are located. If they're all still on top of the gears, that's great. If you have a couple stuck on these this side of the case, make sure you take them straight off. Put them straight back on to the gear where they belong. That way everything is still located exactly where it was from factory, so you know on reassembly the blaster is going to operate the same as how it was before you pull it apart. Alright, with the upper, guys, first thing I am going to do Going to lever up on the rear here of this piston, pulling the piston out. Now once we pull that out, I'll just put it to the side here. We now have your tappet plate set up here. Tappet plate has a spring at the front here. I'm just going to pull up on that spring, pop that off. Now I can basically pull the whole cylinder, the rear of the cylinder, front of the nozzle. That pulls your whole upper pump assembly out. So you are going to have your tappet plate, your cylinder. I'm just going to detach that from the cylinder, and your cylinder head and the actual nozzle itself. So that is your whole upper pump assembly removed. Alright, we're going to remove that tappet plate spring. As you can see, there is a hook underneath the tappet plate where that spring will attach to. So we'll keep those two together as well. Now we are left with the rest of the blaster internal. So what we're looking at here is your 3 gears and your anti-reverse latch. We also do have your trigger hooked up to a little micro switch in here. With the ARP, guys, one thing to note is this trigger here, it operates the blaster through your little MOSFET board with a little micro switch. Now please be careful when you're squeezing down on that trigger. If you are over squeezing, you can actually cause that micro switch to mushroom out and fail, and then you will start to notice things like 1 shot may become a 3-shot burst mode, or it may stop working altogether. So if you've got power everywhere and your mag prime still works but the blaster's not shooting, that is usually what you have done. You've squeezed that trigger too hard and it has caused a failure with your micro switch. But moving on, guys, we're going to start to take out your gears. Now, as I'm taking these gears out, you're just looking to make sure that your shims are still stuck on the posts. Double checking on the base there, on this bush, there is no shim left over. So that gear is exactly how it was placed in there from factory. So I'm just going to put that to the side. I'm going to go down to the bottom gear, which is called your bevel gear. This gear here has a little anti-reverse latch to the side of it. I'm just going to put my finger on the top post of that anti-reverse latch. Just going to pull that gear straight up and out, and you'll see here that reverse latch springs backwards. That's fine for now, but you'll notice I've got the shim on the top, but the shim underneath is still stuck down there in the box. So we're actually going to grab that shim out, place it straight back on the gear, and that way just double checking there's nothing else down there. So that gear again is as it was fitted to the blaster from the factory. Shim on the bottom, shim on the top. Alright, anti-reverse latch, guys. This little latch here can be a big pain if you do not fit this one back into the box correctly. This one here actually levers against the bevel gear and locks it. So as the blaster is cycling, when you let go of the trigger, the gears will slide back, and this little latch here is going to lock out on that gear. If you don't fit that properly, you will notice a noise when you are shooting the blaster, shooting forwards. When you let go of the trigger, it can roll backwards. It makes a really weird noise. If you do find there is a weird noise going on in the blaster when you let off the trigger, that is exactly where I'd be looking. Straight to your anti-reverse latch. I will show you how to assemble that one correctly when we reinstall everything. Now your last gear, guys, is your spur gear or your step gear. This one here, just pulled it straight up and out. Shim's still on the top, shim is on the bottom. There is nothing left in the case. Yeah, we are good to go. Alright, now I'm just going to leave this one down here. Now keep in mind, guys, when you do assemble or have your gears in close proximity, if you do drop a shim off of one gear, you pick it up and put it on the other gear, again, there's going to cause you all kinds of grief. So for myself, I would separate them, just when you're new to it, just separate them away from each other. So if you've got a shim in that area, you know it goes on that gear. Whereas if you got all three together and you got 3 shims falling off, yeah, good luck. So yeah, just practice that if you can to start with. Otherwise guys, we're at that point now where doing general maintenance. I'm just going to grab some paper towel here. You can also use cotton buds as well. They're excellent for cleaning out parts of your gearbox. Some isopropyl alcohol on your cotton bud works a treat. But for purposes we have today, just some paper towel here, and I'm going to get right down in the bottom here. We can see there is a little bit of metal filings here. So we're just going to clean all of that out. Alright, so as you can see now, we've cleaned most of that out. Now if I had a cotton bud here, I could go through and get right into the corners and actually run that all the way along and clean that right out. Now if you don't have one, you can use another little trick. You just get your paper towel, use the point of your screwdriver and just push that right into the corners and slide that along the edges. That's going to work just as effectively. Cool. Alright, so we're nice and clean now. Now with the upper assembly, this is the area where your gear set will run. You also do have your upper assembly. It is not a good practice to get grease up in the top here, as that is where the piston slides and you have your O-ring up the front there. Whatever ends up on the side here usually ends up making its way down into the cylinder. So you will notice that from factory these blasters do have a little bit of grease up in the top there. A little bit is not too bad, but sometimes they have so much grease it ends up making its way down into the cylinder and onto the O-ring and causes FPS issues. So when you got it apart, just give them a wipe off. Now you do have the inner channels. There's a little bit of grease in there, just leave that in there, that is alright. But the excess grease running all over the top surfaces, that's fine just to rub that straight off. So basically just wipe that all out. Now just remembering as well guys, this is like a beginner's guide just to cleaning these up, so we're not going to go too full on, just giving you the basics of what you need to know. Moving on to the gear set themselves. With the gears, again with your shims on the bottom, you're going to give that a wipe. Just make sure you do not lose your shim. Now at this point here with myself, I like to get a, if I'm going full on, I like to get a toothbrush with my ISO, spray it down with ISO, fully scrub it down with a toothbrush and then wipe off the excess. But for these builds, because they are just standard, we're just giving them a little bit of maintenance. We're simply just going to rub off the existing grease, clean that off, making sure we don't lose that shim there. And then I'll be going through and grabbing out a little grease kit here. Now this grease here, as you pop the lid off, you will notice it is extremely stringy. It is excellent for your metal gears. It's going to place a little bit on your finger, snap that off, and then we're going to go through, just rub that straight on the bottom there of your gear set, and then we're just going to transfer that to the top as well. Now with this grease, less is more. You do not need a whole lot. It will make its way from one gear to the next gear. So that is basically all I am going to put onto this gear. Actually I'll put a tiny little bit more just around the edge here and in the teeth, and you'll see as I put it back into the box and twist it how it makes its way to the next gears. So we're just going to drop that one back in. He's good to go. Alright, now I'll go through and just quickly wipe off the rest of these gears. Try and speed this up for you guys so you're not waiting all day listening to my beautiful reading voice. Just start to cycle that around and you'll start to see that the grease is actually moving from one gear to the next. So it's actually spreading it all around this bottom gear as well now, which is awesome. Cool. Alright, now we're heading to the anti-reverse latch. This little one here, I'm going to do the same thing for the post. Tiny little bit on the bottom, tiny bit on the top. We're going to drop that with the little lever facing down, and then we can lever that back. So what I'm going to do is putting my finger on top, levering it back, then pushing down, and now I'm going to actually drop this bevel gear in, letting go. And then you can hear the click, hear that audible click, and again. Now that means that when this gear set is spinning around, when you let go of the trigger, it's going to rotate backwards and click. So that's good. If you cannot hear that audible clicking into place once you've fitted that, it means that you've fitted it incorrectly. So again, make sure you drop it in, leave it up towards the top, rotate it backwards, drop your gear in, and then the tension will lock the anti-reverse latch back onto the gear. Awesome. Alright, next up guys, we're going to rotate this gear set around. There we go. So that means the teeth now are out of the way of putting the upper back in. Now the upper assembly here, you've got your cylinder head cylinder. I'm just going to grab a fresh piece of paper, quickly give that a wipe down. Now it would be a good idea as well guys to clean your hands in between each different position. We've got grease on my hands, so I should really be cleaning my hands off before you're playing around with the air seal parts of your gearbox. Going to put that grease back over here. Now, air seal assembly. Grabbing a bit more of your silicone, a little bit around the edge of your cylinder head, flipping that port to the rear, so that would be at the front. We want it to be at the rear. Popping that straight in, work that silicone around. I'm going to leave that point there. Nozzle off. A little bit of silicone inside your nozzle. And work that just onto the cylinder stem there. Help get a little bit more air seal. And then this part here, this is where you really need to have the clean hands, because I will be putting a bit of oil inside, and then I would just be working that oil in all the way around that cylinder. And then next up, we are going to be grabbing the actual piston here. Now with these pistons and these O-rings, you can quickly pop that O-ring off, put it in between your fingers, and give it just a little bit of a stretch. Don't overstretch it because it will work against you, but just a little bit of a stretch there. And then go ahead, drop some more silicone oil all the way around that O-ring. Alright. Now just going to pop that one in, and just push the whole lot out, and there you go. Solid air seal. That's what you want to see. Now it's not going to seal obviously to the port, but as soon as it gets past the port, solid air seal. That is exactly what we're chasing. Alright. Reassembly time. Tappet plate on to the nozzle. You'll see the little cutout in the nozzle. Slot it into your tappet plate. Slot that on. Just making sure everything is sitting and located. You got your little hole in your cylinder head. You do have the holes in the front of the gearbox, the post. Just make sure that's lined up. Make sure your piston is actually lined up in the rack. You definitely don't want that off to the 45 or upside down. So make sure that's lined up. Alright, tappet plate on. We're going to put the spring on the front. Now this part here, we are going to stretch and pop that spring onto the little post in the front and pop that down. Now usually I have a smaller pin. I just put it through the hole of the spring, drag it forwards, hold it on top of the post, and then pop that spring down. Makes it a little bit easier. Other than that though guys, you are basically ready to reassemble this blaster. With this setup here, how I've showed you guys, I have used very minimal grease. You could use a little bit more, but you don't need to really go too overboard with it. But other than that, everything is in position. The main issues again, if you are squeezing the trigger down really hard, you may have a micro switch issue. Otherwise these blasters are actually very damn good, so you shouldn't really have any other issues than that, unless it's human error with reassembly from the maintenance. Otherwise guys, basically grab the opposite side of your shell. I'm going to start at the front, popping that on, locating. Now here we are going to see you've got your 3 holes again with your anti-reverse latch. What you're trying to do is locate the posts of each gear and then basically just pop that whole shell down like that. Now usually again at this point I have a very small pick, and I will use the pick into the center of the gear shaft and pull them forwards, backwards, wherever I need to get them into that bush. And then I'll go through and just do that on each individual gear set, as well as the anti-reverse latch. But we are completely locked on and home. Last thing to double check is just making sure you had your wires in the correct position before you put the opposite side of the shell on. And then we are free now to put some screws back into the case. Alright guys, now we've got the gearbox case back together. Last thing you're going to do is insert your spring back in. Now with your spring and spring retainer, you're going to see your tags there again. So basically pushing straight in, and then we're just going to twist with finger to the right or to the left, whichever way is easier for yourself, until it locks into place. Now the cross in the back there of the spring retainer, if it's not straight up and down, you know that that is fitted off center and it is not actually in the correct position. So be careful of that, as again they can punch straight out and it will come straight back at yourself. Awesome, but that is basically it guys for the ARP. Now with the AK variant, the AK is a V3 gearbox. Internally wise, you're going to be looking at the same setup. You're going to have your 3 different gears with your anti-reverse latch. You're going to have a piston and an O-ring, a cylinder head. So the whole setup internally in here, it's going to be a slightly different shape. The gearbox shape is going to be slightly different with the motor actually attached, but the mechanics are the same. It's the same principle. So you basically want the grease in the same areas. You want to make sure your anti-reverse latch is working correctly. You want to make sure you're using your silicone oil on your O-ring and in your cylinder and on your cylinder nozzle. Yeah, basically the same, very much the same principles. Major differences is this one here. You just have your 1 screw in the base of the hand grip instead of having a cap like you do on the ARP. This one is just your main screw on the base there. Pop that one out. Your receiver, you're going to have, the rear is going to pop up, then you're going to have to remove your blowback system, which is just popping this one here forwards, sliding backwards, removing this rod here. You are going to have your blowback assembly there. You can see that that is sliding backwards and forwards. On the left hand side, you will see there are 2 Phillips head screws there. Remove those 2 Phillips head screws and that will remove that blowback, or your charging handle, sorry. Once you've removed the charging handle, then you're basically going to have to go through and just start stripping the blaster down, which is going to consist of removing your fire selector, removing your grip as we mentioned before with your Phillips head on the bottom there. You are going to have some Phillips head screws in the front of the blaster, and you will also have a few Allen keys at the front here. So you basically take the full front off, take the handle off, take the selector off. There will be a pin going through the actual shell also, and take the rear buttstock out. You can knock down this pin here, knock that through, and that will allow you to remove the actual rear buttstock. And then you just slide the gearbox out, and again, the same as what we've got going on with the ARP internals, same mechanical setup inside, just a little bit different shape of a gearbox. But yeah, we'll just drop that down for now, and that is the basics of going through an AEG gearbox with your greasing of the gears and your silicone oil for your cylinder head nozzle setup.